Throughout recorded history, the humanoids of D&D have feared the Yuan-Ti, those sentient snake folk whose cultures, magic, weapons, cities, and visible accomplishments rival those of humanoids. Fireside terror tales tell of slithering death, unblinking eyes, and fangs in the night. And a few even hint at the Serpent folk's fell plans to enslave all other races and breed them like cattle. Some people scoff at such talk, but the wisest sages warn that these fears have a solid foundation. Merchants of the great cities readily trade rumors of nagas and snake-headed humans who rule entire city-states, and of jungles that swarm with many-headed snakes as long as barges. But among those who live in lands closer to the Yuan-Ti, talk of them is far more guarded. Those who know of this sinister and secretive race of serpentine creatures rarely speak their name above a whisper. Although farmers and stay-at-home crafters in most human-dominated realms know nothing of the Yuan-Ti beyond the tales told in taverns, many far-traveled folk are convinced that these malevolent serpent beings are at work behind the scenes. They're just not quite sure where or how. And there is truth in that belief. These reptilian humanoids seem to come writhing out of myth and bedtime stories, but their secret existence is a nightmarish reality. For, whether they walk on two legs or slither on scaled tail, the snake-headed Yuan-Ti plot dominion over all. Their sibilant whispers lurk behind many vile plots and dire calamities, though few discover their machinations until it is too late. And though their activity is rarely detected and their influence is hardly apparent, it is prudent for any adventurer to heed the ancient words of wisdom passed down across generations. Crawling evils never sleep. I am Omar Timsah.
I am William Stark.
And this is D&D Legends and Lore.
Toril. The world of Forgotten Realms has long been home to reptilian creatures ever since the mists lifted from the newly formed continents. Some sages believe that before the coming of dragons, many lands were dominated by creatures that some humanoids called thunderers or behemoths. Lizards ranging from a few inches in length to the size of the biggest ocean-going ships that humankind has since constructed. Amid this flourishing profusion of reptiles were certain kinds of sentient lizards and snakes that developed societies, mastered magic, and eventually built empires. In this ancient time, the lizard people known as Saruk rose to become the dominant race of such a world. Through their superior intellect and tactical sense, they forged two empires, Marshulk and Okoth, vast realms wherein they enslaved, bred, and experimented upon other creatures. It was thus the Yuan-Ti, the greatest creations of the Saruk, were first brought into existence.
Yuan-Ti are devious serpent folk devoid of compassion. From remote temples in jungles, swamps, and deserts, the Yuan-Ti plot to supplant and dominate all other races and to make themselves gods. The bodies of all Yuan-Ti have a mix of human-like and snake-like parts, but the proportion varies from individual to individual. Some have a scattering of reptilian scales, while others are giants that are more snake than human. Typically, the more snake-like Yuan-Ti are, the greater esteem they hold among their kind. Scale colors are usually simple greens and browns, but more elaborate swirls, stripes, or diamond patterns are possible, even in blues and reds. Yuan-Ti society is a caste system based on how complete a person's transformation from humanoid to serpent is. The vast majority of Yuan-Ti fall into three categories: abominations, malazans, and purebloods, while the mutated brood guards and exceedingly rare anathemas have their place in the hierarchy as well. Yuan-Ti abominations are monstrous serpents with burly humanoid torsos and arms. Abominations form the highest caste of Yuan-Ti society, and they most closely resemble the race as the serpent gods intended it. They mastermind elaborate schemes and perform dark rites in the hope of one day ruling the world. Yuan-Ti malazans are a hideous blend of human and serpentine features. 3 different types of malazans are known to exist, and other types are possible. Malazans form the middle caste of Yuan-Ti society and hunt with arrows tipped with their own venom. They use their magical powers of suggestion to force their enemies to surrender. Yuan-Ti purebloods form the lowest caste of Yuan-Ti society. They closely resemble humans, yet a pureblood can't pass for human under close scrutiny, because there's always some hint of its true nature, such as scaly patches of skin, serpentine eyes, pointed teeth, or a forked tongue. Wearing cloaks and cowls, they masquerade as humans and infiltrate civilized lands to gather information, kidnap prisoners for interrogation and sacrifice, and trade with anyone who has something that can further their myriad plots. The exceedingly rare Yuan-Ti known as anathemas look much like abominations, but larger, with clawed hands and 6 snake heads sprouting from where the head should be. Each anathema is the product of a unique ritual that alters its original abomination form, increasing its size, power, and intelligence. Other Yuan-Ti treat anathemas like demigods, and they naturally assume a leadership position over all others in the area. An anathema's aggressive presence brings about a transformation in a Yuan-Ti city, pushing it to become more warlike and expansionistic. The anathema directs the Yuan-Ti to wage small-scale wars on humanoids, usually through proxies such as cults and allied creatures, and uses these conflicts to gather riches and slaves until it has enough resources to establish the Yuan-Ti as rulers of the region. The devolved creatures known as brood guards are created by feeding humanoids a special elixir, which gives them scaly skin and a compulsion to follow orders. Because their minds are crippled by their transformation, brood guards are less useful than slaves for many tasks, but because of their unwavering loyalty, they make capable guardians for Yuan-Ti eggs. All Yuan-Ti can interbreed. Females usually lay clutches of eggs, which are stored in a common hatchery, although live births aren't uncommon. A mating between Yuan-Ti of different types almost always produces eggs that hatch into Yuan-Ti of the weaker parent, so most choose partners of the same type in the interest of maintaining the strength of their personal bloodline. The Yuan-Ti know rituals that can transform an individual into a more powerful type. The cost and time required to perform the ritual is prohibitive, and as a result, most Yuan-Ti never get the opportunity to undergo such a transformation. Every use of the ritual must be modified to suit the individual undergoing the transformation, and requires rare herbs, exotic magical substances, snakes, and 1 or more humans to be sacrificed and eaten as part of the procedure. The sacrifices involved in such rituals are the least of the Yuan-Ti's concerns, though, for the Yuan-Ti have abandoned their humanity and consider non-serpentine humanoids to be lesser creatures, barely more civilized than common apes. Although some purebloods are able to reproduce with humans, most are disgusted by the idea and would do so only if seduction is necessary for a pureblood to preserve a role as a confidant or advisor in human society. The very rare offspring of such a union are always purebloods, although they may appear fully human at birth and for several years afterward. Most sages believe the Yuan-Ti to be the remnants of an ancient, decadent human empire, though this conflicts with the theory of the Saruk-created mythos. Their society is said to have built great temples of stone and forged metal into armor, tools, and weapons. In their ceremonies, they paid homage to the snake as the embodiment of the qualities they most appreciated. They lauded the serpent's sinuous flexibility, its calculated poise, and its deadly strike. They developed a philosophy of separating emotion from intellectual pursuits, allowing them to focus their energy on personal advancement and expanding their territory. They believed themselves to be the most enlightened mortals in the world, and in their hubris, they sought to become ever greater. The human civilization that gave rise to the Yuan-Ti was among the richest in the mortal world. It rapidly progressed in metalworking, using keen intellect and magic to discover the secrets of making steel. Its military shattered rival tribes and developed advanced tactics for fighting in forests and open plains. The civilization grew into a cluster of allied city-states. Conquered neighbors were allowed to keep their leaders and culture so long as they paid tribute, swore allegiance to the victors, and incorporated their conqueror serpent gods into their religions. These victories sent a constant influx of food, ore, and slaves back to the home cities. The wealth of the empire allowed the ruling elite plenty of time to focus on intellectual pursuits. These nobles turned to philosophy and prayer, offering gifts of magic and animal sacrifices to the serpent gods, paying homage to the perfection of the Ophidian form. The serpent gods taught the humans how to take on aspects of the snake, but the cost of the change was high, requiring many sacrifices for each person to be transformed. Entire households of slaves in one city-state were killed and eaten to create the first Yuan-Ti, and once the news of how to perform these rituals spread to other leaders, the call for slaves to fuel the process increased. As the Serpent gods began to demand more and more sacrifices, the Yuan-Ti stepped up their raids on bordering settlements to meet this need. The physical and magical prowess of the Yuan-Ti Empire allowed the former humans to retain their holdings for several hundred years, until a combination of drought, attacks by enemies, including dragons and nagas, civil war, torpor among the Serpent gods, and the development of iron weapons by some of their conquered enemies finally loosened the Yuan-Ti's hold over nearby lands. The Serpent people withdrew to their fortified cities and underground temples, ceding the rest of their territory to their former minions. The Yuan-Ti crawled away and hid in a matter of weeks, all but disappearing from the world. Yuan-Ti structures throughout the land were torn down to celebrate liberation from the snake-bodied oppressors, and within a few generations, the Yuan-Ti were all but forgotten by the new humanoid civilizations. For over 1,000 years after their empire fell, the Yuan-Ti remained ensconced in their hidden strongholds, biding their time until they were ready to strike again. Today, with their numbers greatly depleted and their enemies much stronger than in ages past, the Yuan-Ti know they can't resort to direct attacks in order to reclaim their rightful place in the world. Operating out of the subterranean ruins of their buildings in foreign lands, Yuan-Ti agents infiltrate enemy governments to discover weaknesses that their leaders can exploit. The Yuan-Ti look forward to the day when their empire rises again and spreads across the world like venom through the blood, as it once did. Because their population is so small, the Yuan-Ti are aware they are vulnerable in open warfare. Instead, their current plans assume they will never rule outwardly in human society, so they gain influence by controlling enemy rulers and those close to them through blackmail, drugs, magic, and the subterfuge of disguised purebloods or infiltrators.
Created by the Saruk in the long-ago days of the Maerschalk Empire, the first Yuan-Ti were the results of controlled breeding experiments that melded early humans with serpents and Saruk. Altered and augmented by Saruk magic, they became the most powerful and successful of the created scaled races, more intelligent than the lizard folk and more loyal and versatile than the Nagas. The Saruk favored the Yuan-Ti over those other creations and entrusted them with the most challenging of tasks, those that required free will. By and large, the Yuan-Ti were happy to serve in such capacities. And as the depth and fervor of Seth worship grew among them, the Yuan-Ti increasingly viewed such service as right and fitting, the only proper aim in pursuit of their kind. Yet the very growth of intellect, society, and faith among the Yuan-Ti inevitably weakened their obedience to their creators.
Yuan-Ti live in ordered hierarchical groups known as households, each of which is governed by a strict chain of command. The members of a household are related by either blood or mating. Any Yuan-Ti who breaks the chain of command, either by defying orders or by reporting to a superior other than the one directly above him, is regarded with suspicion and distaste. Such a transgression is usually accompanied by a formal loss of status that results in a lower position on the chain of command. Such a demotion may not occur if senior Yuan-Ti dispute with each other over the issue at hand, and a majority of their kin don't strongly side with either one of them. Persistent breakers of the hierarchy, however, are cast out or even slain in accidents that everyone in the household knows were not accidents at all. Young and ignorant Yuan-Ti are permitted a few transgressions against authority, but they are sharply reprimanded and punished by curbs on their behavior for such indiscretion. Heirs, lovers, and other favored Yuan-Ti who defy their elders are typically punished with dangerous missions. Those who return are entirely forgiven until the next time they defy authority. For non-Yuan-Ti, breaking the chain of command means death, though its manner depends on the status of the individual. A slave valued for diligent, long-term service becomes a sacrifice to the gods. One in disfavor usually becomes food after being punished and then slain by other slaves. A captive or slave of marginal status is often hunted for sport and casually maimed, then sent to the stew pots or simply devoured alive. The detached intellectual nature of the Yuan-Ti doesn't lend itself to fervent or devout worship in the manner that others revere their deities. Yuan-Ti life revolves around their temples, yet Yuan-Ti don't love the gods they worship. Instead, They see worship as a means to attain power. A Yuan-Ti believes an individual who attains enough power can devour and replace one of the Yuan-Ti gods. The Yuan-Ti strive for ascension and are willing to commit the darkest atrocities to achieve it. It is thus they acknowledge and adhere strictly to the teachings of a wide range of supernatural and divine entities. Some of these are true deities, some are primordial spirits as powerful as gods, and some are creatures of questionable origin. Dendar, the Night Serpent, came into being before recorded history, spawned from the feverish dreams of the first intelligent creatures. She subsists and grows stronger by feeding on the fears that plague the folk of the world. Her followers believe that Dendar is a harbinger of the end of things, which will come when she amasses enough power to consume the world. Another legend concerning her speaks of an iron door to the underworld behind which she lurks. When the time is right, she will tear it down, then eat the sun, plunging the world into darkness before she finally devours it. Yuanti worshippers of Dendar are led by nightmare speakers, Malazan warlocks that honor their deity through acts of terror and receive magical power in return. Rather than killing their enemies, these followers of the Night Serpent prefer to threaten and torture them, the better to feed and strengthen the goddess. Mershulk. Though the master of the pit is not conscious, neither is he entirely dormant. Mirroring the fate of the Yuan-Ti in the world, Mershulk entered a deep slumber when the serpent folk left the surface and went into hiding in ages past. It is unclear if declining worship caused him to fall asleep, or if his prolonged torpor caused his worshippers to abandon him. Even in his compromised state, Mershulk grants spells to his clergy in response to their invocations. Rousing him for advice or direct intervention is possible, but requires many ritual murders to be performed in his name, and his return to consciousness lasts only a short time. The leaders of Mershulk's worshippers, called Pitmasters, are Malazan warlocks that uphold and advance the age-old Yuan-Ti traditions. They sense that it has become easier to wake him in recent decades, and believe this to be a sign that he will soon fully awaken, shed his skin, and, renewed by transformation, restore the Yuan-Ti to their rightful place as masters of the mortal world. Seth, the Sibilant Death. In the last years before the Yuan-Ti Empire collapsed, Seth appeared to the Serpent folk in the form of a winged Yuan-Ti. He promised to lead the Yuan-Ti away from the brink of defeat and back to the pinnacle of world domination in return for their veneration. Many of Mershulk's devout turned to the worship of the Sibilant Death, believing him to be an avatar of their deity. They granted him enough power to mount a brief recovery, but those actions were too little and too late to prevent the collapse of the empire. Seth chose to rest and gather strength during the years of decline, as more and more of the Yuan-Ti adopted his worship. His most devout followers, known as Mind Whisperers, use their God-given magic to emulate Seth's tactics and principles. They strive to succeed by offering an alternative choice to contesting viewpoints or plans, and in so doing they exude an air of self-importance that gives them a less than savory reputation among the Yuan-Ti that follow other gods. The Yuan-Ti's dispassionate attitude towards religion is especially evident among the powerful Yuan-Ti that take one of the lesser serpent gods as an object of worship. The worshipper of a serpent god pays homage not out of respect or fear, but because it aspires to emulate the entity, beseeching it to reveal the secret of transcending mortality. Then, once armed with that knowledge, the Yuan-Ti sets out to supplant its deity and become a new serpent god. The serpent gods don't wish to be brought low, or to be bled of power as Mershulk was, so they mollify their worshippers with pronouncements that hint at what the supplicants seek. The truth is never easy to ferret out, but rarely an exceptionally clever Yuan-Ti succeeds in attaining divine form and vanquishing its benefactor. This cannibalistic pressure from mortals means that the lower ranks of the serpent gods experience a change every century or so, although often it is the newest Yuan-Ti godling that falls prey to the next one's ambitions.
As their civilization grew, Yuan-Ti began to covet the powers, possessions, and influence of the Saruk. Though they admired Saruk's society and embraced its values and worldview, including the fact that lesser beings were meant to be slaves to their betters, they also came to see the Saruk as lazy, decadent, and inattentive. The Yuan-Ti had always taken pride in their own accomplishments as players in Saruk society, but increasingly they saw themselves as more worthy of Seth's favor and rewards than their creators, and began to resent their domination by lesser beings. Eventually, the Marishalk Empire had weakened enough that outside forces, most notably dragons, decided to launch a concerted attack. These enemy forces crushed many of the Saruk's lizardfolk armies, most of which were led by Yuan-Ti. This bloodbath led some Yuan-Ti to turn against their creators, and the great empires of the Saruk fell one by one. The Saruk fled, hid, sank into hibernation, or perished, and the Yuan-Ti were free at last.
During their ascension ages ago, the Yuan-Ti freed themselves from the yoke of their human emotions. Now they view the world from a pragmatic and dispassionate perspective. They understand emotional connections in a detached, intellectual way, and recognize that these feelings in others can be exploited through bribes, favors, or threats. Yuan-Ti put little value on humanoid lives, even those of their own slaves and cultists. They would poison children to carry out a threat against their parents, or turn one person into a brood guard in order to show her family the consequence of resistance. They might refrain from provoking others' feelings if doing so could adversely affect the Yuan-Ti's plans, but they understand humanoid psychology well enough to know that they can get away with this casual disregard for life almost any time. Furthermore, in the Yuan-Ti caste system, a greater Yuan-Ti's life is worth far more than a lesser one's. Weaker citizens are expected to lay down their lives to protect their betters. Leaders rely on this zealotry in their plans, and although they don't needlessly waste the lives of purebloods on futile actions, most strategies include a fallback option in which mobs of purebloods and slaves are thrown at opposing forces in the hope of allowing the Malazans and Abominations time to escape. Yuan-Ti are likely to retreat or flee from conflict if they don't believe they have a reasonable chance of success. This reaction isn't out of cowardice, but practicality. Yuan-Ti value their own lives much too highly to risk them when the odds aren't in their favor. A short retreat might be just the thing to reach a better tactical position, find allies, or to allow the Yuan-Ti the opportunity to study their opponents and implement better tactics. Any enemy who chases a group of fleeing Yuan-Ti might be on the victorious side of a rout, or could be heading into a trap. If the enemy has been encountered before, it is likely that the Yuan-Ti have prepared a special ambush at the end of the pursuit. The objective of the Yuan-Ti as a race is to conquer and enslave others. They don't espouse the sort of evil that calls for them to butcher or eradicate all who oppose them. In keeping with their goal of domination, the Yuan-Ti would rather capture potentially useful opponents than kill them. They use many methods for capturing enemies, such as poisoning, knocking out an opponent instead of making a killing blow, throwing nets, using magic such as suggestion, or restraining them in the coils of a giant snake. To force their compliance, enemies might be brainwashed, charmed, tortured, or transformed into brood guards. Those that prove intractable still have their uses, either as sacrifices to the gods or as food. Yuan-Ti have no sense of honorable combat. They are naturally stealthy, and if they can sneak up on enemies, either in an ambush or to murder them in their sleep, the Yuan-Ti will do so, and they actually prefer these tactics to open warfare. Because abominations and malazans can change into the shapes of snakes, they can keep their presence hidden and get into places their normal forms couldn't enter. Some humans believe that not only are the Yuan-Ti superior to humans and worthy of emulation, but they are also the blessed emissaries of the Serpent gods. From these entwined beliefs are born the Serpent cults, groups of devout mortals who serve the Yuan-Ti either directly or in foreign outposts. Fanatical in their ideals, these cultists are willing to die for the Yuan-Ti and their gods, whether from an enemy's weapon or at the point of a sacrificial knife. The Yuan-Ti use the cults devoted to them as a steady supply of willing minions and sycophants. Many Yuan-Ti establish or encourage cults to gather the special herbs and magic they need to perform the ritual for evolving into a more powerful form. And just as the Yuan-Ti have rituals to transform their own bodies, they have a ritual that can change a human into a pureblood. They sometimes use the promise of this ritual as an enticement for power-hungry followers, or a reward for their most devoted cultists. Cultists ingratiate themselves into the local populace, usually by promising perfection of the flesh, sometimes included in the healing of afflictions, freedom from the ideas of sin and guilt, and hedonistic delights to those who join the cult. The leader of a cult is usually advised by a pureblood that relays orders and information between the cult and a Yuan-Ti city. Most Yuan-Ti cities were built during the height of their empire centuries ago. Since they no longer have the vast number of expendable slaves necessary for large work projects, the Yuan-Ti content themselves with maintaining these ancient places rather than building new ones for their needs. Although these sites are hundreds or even thousands of years old, they don't look or feel primitive. The Yuan-Ti Empire was once very advanced, and although it has declined, its culture is still thriving on a smaller scale. Because the Yuan-Ti were previously human, their architecture reflects human ideas about art and beauty. Over time, this perspective was skewed toward the concept that the snake is the perfect form, so serpents are a common theme in their aesthetic. Yuan-Ti are masters of experimentation, both magical and otherwise. They have had centuries to reap the benefits of Saruk, or ancient human sorcery, and the research of thousands of inspired Yuan-Ti ancestors. Thus, the depth and variety of arcane spells at their command rival those of the most magically mighty humanoid cultures. Through their own research, the Yuan-Ti have even developed subtle variants of many human-created spells that paralyze creatures or move them from afar.
Over the centuries that followed, most Yuan-Ti forgot the Saruk and came to consider themselves the most capable and powerful beings in all of Faerun. They felt that their eventual rise to world domination was inevitable if they went about their task properly. The great Saruk once dwelt in great fortresses and built a society whose breadth and might has never been seen since. Today, some millennia later, they are now all but extinct, but the Yuan-Ti carry on their legacy. They continue to experiment upon themselves to master their snake-like forms and to enslave other sentient beings who they force to worship them as gods. The ever-expanding humanoid influence over the worlds of D&D has done little to check the spread of the Scaled Ones. They are an insidious threat. They are patient, ever-present, and ruthless. Their advance is subtle. When they do make their moves, they enact precisely the best strategy, with cold calm to achieve the maximum possible effect.
This has been D&D Legends and Lore. Thanks so much for listening or watching on your platform of choice. If you enjoyed this episode, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Also, consider leaving us a review, especially on Apple Podcasts. It really helps others find the show. If you'd like to support us more directly, check out our Patreon or channel memberships on YouTube. There you'll also find ad-free early episodes as well as live play and third-party D&D content. Links, as always, are in the description. Lastly, we wanted to give a big thank you to our video editor, Sean, aka The Unhumble Bard. You can check him out over on his YouTube channel, The Unhumble Bard. With that, thank you for listening, and happy adventuring.